what are some of those things? Oh, thank you for turning that on. So we're going to put all of these in the parking lot for our social hour later. All right, so with that, thanks for coming back. For the new folks joining us, we do have captioning available. You can click in your Zoom bar, show captions, or access it at an external link that can be accessed in the chat. We have interpreters available today, ASL interpreters. They should always be visible. If they're not visible, please let us know in the chat. We also have Spanish interpreters available. You can select the interpretation button on your Zoom menu and select the Spanish channel. Next slide. Just as a reminder, the presentation recordings, the slides and transcript, all of that will be available on the ILRU on-demand training page. And after this session, we do ask that you complete our evaluation. We want to hear how these engagement opportunities worked for you and ways we can improve that engagement. Next slide. And finally, the options for engaging with our panelists today, or for session 2. We will have chat open to host and panelists during the whole session. At certain parts, we will might turn on public chat so you can see everyone's posts. We will give notice to folks so that they can make proper accommodations on their end to adjust notifications if you so choose. We also have the question box, so please continue to put questions in the parking lot so we can come back to, and or our speakers might get to it. During any call to actions, we have the raise hand feature, which we will allow folks to unmute. We're not using it in this session, but tomorrow and day 2, we will be using the poll feature again. So next slide. All right, so with that, session 2 is going to be focusing on leveraging affirmative action requirement in Title VII of the Rehabilitation Act to sustain IL movement and consumer control and power. And don't worry if that is a little unclear right now. We have some amazing speakers that are going to dive into all of this. Next slide. All right. And again, the evaluation is an opportunity for us to hear from you, topics that you want us to follow up on, engagement strategies that work for you. So please do the evaluation link. All right, next slide. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kimberly Tissot, President and Chief Executive Officer at Able South Carolina. And her team will do introductions, and let's get started. All right.
Hey everyone, so happy to be here with you guys today. I am Kimberly Tissot. I am the President and CEO of Able South Carolina, and I'm a white woman with blonde hair, middle-aged woman with blonde hair a little past my shoulders, and I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses and a gingham top. If I was presenting in front of you all today in person, I also walk on crutches. I have a high-level amputation from a childhood cancer, and I have several invisible disabilities as well, including ADHD, anxiety, and several health disabilities related to the impact of chemotherapy and radiation. I will pass it over to Crush. You go on mute, Crush.
Oh. Sorry about that. Thank you for having me. My name is Crush Rush. That is my real name, as people always ask. I am an African-American man with curly, unruly hair right now. I have a beard, and I am wearing a blue and light blue patterned shirt. I am one of the few that have invisible disability. I have ADHD, agoraphobia, general anxiety, and CPTSD. I am so happy to be here. Thank you.
Ebony, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony DeLoach. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an African American woman or person of color, and I am the Disability Health Equity Coordinator at Able, South Carolina. If you were seeing me in person today, I am a wheelchair user sitting in my purple wheelchair from my home. I have a beige blazer sweater on because it's very cold in my apartment. And I have my Able South Carolina badge and a blue, yellow, green striped dress underneath. And I'm very happy to be here with you all on today. I am also a person with a developmental and physical disability. Happy to be here.
All right, so we will go to the next slide. And so we're going to start talking a little bit about the history of the independent living movement. And we're going to start off, everyone knows who Ed Roberts is. If not, there is a visual of him on the screen. It's a black and white photo of Ed Roberts. He is using a sip and puff chair, and he has that in his mouth, and he's leaning in his wheelchair. So IL was created by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. Before IL came along, our voices really were not being heard. We did not have a movement. And so this was our first movement to really be able to make systems change, but also impact the lives of our peers. And so we will go to the next slide. And I want to read a quote, and the quote is on 3 different slides because it is lengthy, but I want to just quote what Ed Roberts said in the very beginning. The leadership of Sills and Silks should be around political advocacy, around political change, rather than around one advocate working to get services for one person. All things change when you get political power. We'll go to the next slide. And if we are co-opted by the system, we are in trouble. More important than being service deliverers is being advocates. We're too heavy into social services. Yes, it's easier to get money that way, but it's harder to get advocacy. We're losing the ideology of independence. Next slide. And a person with a disability should be running the center. So that was the original intent. So, and he says, yes, we should include parents and friends, which are allies as well. I'd like to see much more teamwork at Sills and Silks under disability leadership. And so this is what we're going to be talking about in our session today, the importance of our disability-led movement, the importance of disability leadership. I know as a CEO for an organization, there's not many people in our state that are that have a disabled leadership. And so we really stand out a lot. And I think probably many of you all stand out too in your states. And so how do we leverage that and how do we boost that? We'll go to the next slide. And so wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how we do things at Able, South Carolina. And we know every SIL is very different to meet the needs of your community, but we are known for being disability led in South Carolina and beyond. So people really start coming to us to get that disability representation. If they want feedback from the disability community, and we preach that every single day, like nothing about us without us, they call us. Just next week, we're going to have a Sisters of Charity event where they are specifically wanting to hear from people with disabilities the first time ever about poverty and how the cost of being disabled contributes to even more poverty. And so that's the first time ever because we have been preaching this message, nothing about us without us. And they came to us and said, can you help us recruit people with disabilities? And so now disability will be in a data point, which is very important because we're often left out of those data pieces. And disability representation matters. Funders and the community want this. And think about how representation has really come into the light in the last couple of years. We don't want organizations that are about something that the leadership is not part of. And so we'll continue. Next slide. And then disability, so SILs are not service providers. And I know Paula said that earlier, we are not service providers. And so we don't want to be compared to other service providers like vocational rehabilitation, the blind agencies, other nonprofits, because we're just not. We are a disability-led organization providing programs and advocacy to our peers, for our peers, to build up disability leadership. Disability-led is included in every single thing that we do, and we're very proud of it. We really strut and show off our disabilities because we want to create more leadership. We want to change the negative perception of disabled people in South Carolina by really showing up, talking about having a disability, how, we can lead organizations, we can work, we can, do things to really contribute to our society and our community, and that we need to be taken just as important as anybody else. And then, Enable South Carolina creates its own table as well. And so I forgot to mention that we are at all tables. And so we are at tables where there is intersection of disability. So thinking about sexual and domestic violence, poverty, child welfare. We are at nutrition programs, food banks. So we are at the table for all of these different programs because we know that disability does intersect with every single population out there. We've also partnered with Black Lives Matter in South Carolina during a lot of rallies to ensure that people who are Black and disabled are able to participate in the march. And so really looking beyond that, there have been some times that we've had to create our own table. And that looks very differently because maybe we're at a table and just not enough is being done about disability and not enough focus, or sometimes people just want to overlook it. Like, so if you can't convince somebody to change, obviously we have done creating a lot of tables, including a statewide advocacy day for access and independence. We have our own disability coalition that has over 45 members. We have a South Carolina disasters task force that runs and coordinates disability services and programs for people with disabilities and policies around evacuation and emergency disasters. And so we live in a state that has hurricanes. And so we're at that table a lot, really coordinating with all the state agencies. We have a public health task force now that really focuses on really changing the policies around public health and accessibility and even medical rationing, because we saw that as an issue during COVID. So if you're at, be at all the tables, but sometimes just know that you do have to create tables that are disability led and bring other people into it as well. We will go to the next slide. So why does disability-led representation matter? And so we're going to talk a little bit about our stories and how we got involved. But growing up as a child with a disability, I had cancer at the age of 2. And so I grew up feeling like I just did not belong in society, really feeling like I was getting special attention, really not really fitting into classroom environments, and really having to fight to be included. I remember even when I was in kindergarten, had to really fight to be at the same table as kids without disabilities. And so having that role model and having that, knowing that you have a community just brings so much confidence, and you have that mentorship, you have those role models that you can see that disability is, you should be proud of being a person with a disability, and it's a part of you, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. When you don't see people with disabilities in the community, you don't think we're there. You don't, and if we're not talking and using the word disabled or disability, we're automatically almost becoming embarrassed of it. And that's something that we have to continue talking about our disabilities. If you have invisible disabilities, bring that to the table, talk about it, because that's something you should be very comfortable with discussing within a disability-led organization. So I'm going to pass it over to Crush to talk about how he got engaged and why disability-led matters, and then Ebony.
Absolutely. So my story starts essentially with my youth, before ADHD diagnosis. Life was very hard for me, education wise. The things that I really, really loved and engaged, I excelled at. But a lot of things that I felt like I should have been able to do, I was unable to. There was always a wall. There was always something that could distract me. I was very, there were so many things that just did not work out for me the way that I thought that they would, and how kind of society and my parents, said that they should work out for me. I got in a lot of trouble, for essentially, not being able to focus. Before you get a diagnosis, it's easy to say, "Oh, that person's not paying attention. Oh, they're not trying." So I experienced a lot of that as a child, just constantly getting in trouble for no reason in my mind, because I'm like, I know that I gave it my best. I can't really tell you why I've been in my room for 2 hours. I know that I've been cleaning up, but I can't really tell you why my room isn't clean 2 hours later, even though I know that that's what I've been doing. So we kind of fast forward to life, and then anxiety came. My childhood was very high pressure. Going back to the ADHD and the inability to really get things done by other people's standard, and that really kind of facilitated my anxiety. There was always a lot of frustration. There was always a lot of negative talk. A lot of pressure to perform, and when I did not, there were always, some words to be said or punishments to be had. So I became a person that worked in IT, which is one of the most demanding and, just completely demanding and high functioning environments that you can be in. There's always a task. There's always something that needs to be done, always a fire to extinguish. And then I had my first panic attack. I remember having my panic attack, and there was nobody there that could help me. There was nobody there that knew what was going on with me. Everybody was, convinced that I was having a heart attack. I thought that I was having a heart attack. And from that day on, my life really, really changed. Um, it was very hard for me to accept anxiety initially. It was very hard for me to accept that I had panic attacks. Um, that also came with a lot of shame. In the Black community, mental health and disabilities can be kind of frowned on. They're not really taken seriously. I was told that I just needed to go to church more. And there's nothing wrong with church. If that's, that helps you, then perfectly fine. But I was told to go to church. And that's what my issue was. I knew that there was something else going on. I knew what I felt like. I knew what anxiety felt like for me. I knew that my life was changing. I knew that I was losing friendships. I knew that I was now working from home because I could no longer go into the environment that I love. I knew that things were changing for me negatively, and my mental health was declining because of it. At this point, I had left IT. I became a photographer. I had been struggling with it. It was one of the things that I kind of talked about, but it really kind of brought me shame. And then one day I found myself working with this lovely organization called Able South Carolina. I was hired through a third party, and I go in and I see so many people with disabilities. I see so many people talking about their stories. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to open up and tell, Kimberly how I feel. I'm going to open up and I'm going to talk about this thing that's been on my back, that's been really, I feel like I'm alone with. A conversation and some tears later, I realized that I simply have a disability and I have a family. I have people that I can talk to that understand. I met other people with anxiety. I met other Black people with anxiety, which is, something that I had not really come across before. And it changed my life for the better. Now I can talk about the fact that I have anxiety. I can talk about the fact that I have ADHD. I can talk about my CPTSD. I use my platform on social media to talk about it, because I feel like a lot of time on social media, we only highlight the good things. We never talk about the bad things that happen or our hard days. So, I really use my platform to have that disability pride, to speak up, to say, hey, look, disability is not a bad word. In South Carolina, 1 out of 3 people are disabled. In the United States, it's 1 out of 4. So that means I have a lot in common with the people in my community, a lot in common with the people in my state. And so somebody needs to be a beacon. Somebody needs to speak up. And if I already had the platform due to my photography, why not just use my words and tell the story of me and other people like me to say, hey, we're here and we're out here doing the same thing as everybody else. Disabled doesn't mean we can't participate. It doesn't mean we don't deserve a seat at the table. It doesn't mean that we can't achieve. And so Able, South Carolina just literally was a life-changing environment. It was a life-changing conversation. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because I remember the conversation like it was yesterday, and now it's been years. So that's my story.
And now
Well,
he's a board member. So now he's my boss.
now I'm a board member speaking the gospel. And also too, I was supposed to talk about why disability-led representation matters. To me, it matters because I've been a part of a lot of rooms through my photography where I hear people saying, how can we get people here that don't look like us? How can we? And then I look around the room and I'm like, hey, it might be kind of hard to get programming for Black people because there's no Black people in this room. You don't have a place to really start. You may understand, but you don't really live the experience. And allies are great. There's a lot of work that we have to have allies to conquer, but you have to have somebody that truly lives and understand the experience, because we are truly thinking about it in multiple ways, multiple formats. There are things that people may not think about if they do not live with a disability, a certain type of disability. For instance, Kimberly, she has a disability. She only has one leg. I may not be thinking about something that Kimberly's like, hey, look, did you realize that just the grade of how that is actually affects? That's not something I would ever think about, even though I still am a big part of the disability community. So having that representation absolutely matters because we're always thinking about our lived experiences. And that is truly what we need to facilitate change. I'm gonna give it to you,
All
Ebony.
yours, Ebony.
You guys, when I started after Crush, his Crush was he was telling his story. So now I don't know where I will start, but I guess I will start with my youth. I grew up in Jasper County, South Carolina, where no access to transportation, no socialized groups, just nothing. And I did work with a lot of service providers. So after graduating college, I am a college graduate of the University of South Carolina, Aiken, with a bachelor's degree. So I came back home because I had a caregiver who said, you're not ready to move on your own. You think you are, but you're not. And so sadly, I came back home with nothing to do. I was very isolated. I didn't have any groups or any places where I belonged. So I was like always on the phone, calling different organizations, trying to interact with groups. And I think I started working with the Center for Independent Living that was closest to me. But they also didn't have any peer support groups. And I stumbled across Able, South Carolina, just looking online. So I called them and I surprisingly spoke to Miss Kimberly, who was the CEO at the time, and she talked to me. But it's funny now, I was very upset after our first conversation because she gave me a lot of tough love. She told me some things that I had never heard before. And I got off the phone and I was like, how dare this lady talk to me like this? She doesn't know me. She doesn't know what I'm going through. I don't know what is wrong with her. I hung up and then I went to sleep and I thought about it, I was like, she's right. Like maybe she's right. Maybe I can do some things and I can do more and it's okay to have a disability and I can do the things that I want. And so I started with peer support, and Power Hour was formed, which was a peer support group. And I did the peer supports. I would go every week, just Thursday for an hour, and just talk about anything and everything, goals that I had. One of my first goals was to live on my own. My family was totally against it. They were just like, we're gonna live forever. You don't need to live by yourself. We're just gonna take care of you. But that's not what I wanted. I grew up watching Different World and the Cosby Show. So I wanted to go to college. I wanted to experience things. And so I think for me, having Able South Carolina and having the peer support was great, but I still wanted more. I wanted to work. And I did work in other disability organizations. I want to mention that I did work there, but there was no disability representation. There wasn't talk about reasonable accommodations. And in my job with a disability organization in South Carolina, I was drowning. I didn't have the support, nor did I feel like I could speak up for the things that I needed. And I contacted Able after that experience. It was a little too late, but I ended up resigning from that job. And I remember two things distinctly after that experience. One was the executive director said, you need to be with an organization where you shine. And I said, no, I just need to be with an organization that understands me and hears me. I don't want to shine. I just want to work. And so I left that organization, reached out to Able again, went on several job interviews between then, before that time, and then discovered that I wanted to be an AmeriCorps member with Able South Carolina. So I did a term as an AmeriCorps member, and after that, I got the opportunity to work with Able, starting part-time. Now I'm full-time. But why disability representation matters is when I started with disability, and the first conference I ever went to, Independent Living, I met Lamondre Pugh at one of our first Access and Independence and Advocacy Days. Actually, even before then, because we started the Young Adult Leadership Network at Able South Carolina. And I went to that conference and Lamondre was there. And for the first time, I saw someone that looked like me. And he was going around the room and he was using his power chair. And he said, I'm sitting on my throne. And I was just like, wow. But when he spoke, it was like he was only speaking to me. Every time I heard him speak, I was like, I want to do what he does. And I told him one day, I want to be like you when I grow up. I was joking. And he said, you don't want to be like me. You want to be the best Ebony that you can be. And that has stuck with me. But it matters because I saw someone with a disability that was living in his truth. And it made me want those same things. I began to develop that pride in myself. And that's why it matters. We need to see people that look like us.
Thank you, guys. And I will say, you know, representation matters too, because we are peers. And, you know, I was able to talk to Ebony because I heard a lot of what Ebony was telling me, what her parents wanted for her, but I wasn't hearing what she wanted from herself. And so I had to get that out. And that was the tough love to really
Yeah.
promote that independent living philosophy, but also be there and say, you know, we have a team here that we've got you. We support you. This is your community. So we will go to the next slide. And so let's talk about just the affirmative action. Oh, we missed that. Oh, and I'm going to pass this to Ebony because Ebony asked to do the slide yesterday. So I'm going to.
This is our mission. Okay. So our mission at Able, South Carolina, we are an organization leading the charge to equip people with disabilities with the tools to foster pride and direct their own lives. We also educate the community on how to eliminate stereotypes and barriers, and we advocate for access, equity, and inclusion at the individual, local, state, and national levels. We are the people we serve.
Now we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Ebony.
You're welcome.
And so the Rehab Act, in Title VII, there is an affirmative action where people with disabilities are required to be staffed, the majority of people with disabilities, board members, people with disability, the majority of people with significant disabilities, and then staff, leadership. And so how do we do that? So the plan, so the requirement says the plan shall provide satisfactory assurances that all recipients of financial assistance under this chapter will take affirmative action to employ and advance in employment qualified individuals with disabilities on the same terms and conditions required with respect to employment of such individuals under provisions of Section 503. So looking at disability, looking at how are you going to recruit, how are you going to hire people with disabilities? And I think it really takes that leadership down. Obviously our board, and I'll talk a little bit about that, we are very much focused on building leaders, disabled leaders in South Carolina, creating pipelines for employment, making sure that folks don't have to stay with us for a million years. We want them to go and do what they want to do. So we want to push them into the careers that they would like to be in. So how do you do this? And so, there are some things that you must be careful of with the ADA and the Rehab Act. But you can always ask somebody about their disability experience or put in the job job announcement that people with disabilities are encouraged to apply, but also say, we are a disability-led organization ran and operated by the majority of people with disabilities. And so that is something that if people are reading that and people with disabilities are truly reading that, they're going to bring and be ready to talk about their disability, but also making them feel very safe during the interview process. Are you asking for, are there any reasonable accommodations that you need for the interview? And asking that with everyone. So those are some things that you can do, but we have to hire and seek out people with disabilities. So that is our requirement under the law, but that's the only federal program that has this requirement. So we really need to bring it and show it off significantly that we are a disability-led movement. Go to the next slide. And so affirmative action versus what disability-led is. So SILs and SILCs are mandated to be led by the majority of people with disabilities. And so the definition for people with disabilities is the definition under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Disability-led is the key part of the IL philosophy and SIL and SILC culture. So we are a movement, going back to what Ed Roberts said, we are a movement that was created by us for us to be able, and that we should be leading the SILs and SILCs. And so that's something that we really have lost sight of over the last couple of decades. We've seen, where parents, and no offense against parents, but parents leading a Center for Independent Living or a SILC. And there are movements for parents of children with disabilities. This is our only movement. And again, it's also looking at taking leadership away from disabled individuals. And so what can we do? And we'll be talking about that in a little bit of some action alerts that we can do. Affirmative action and disability, it is a critical tool mechanism in the Rehab Act for SILs and SILCs to ensure the hiring and promotion of people with disabilities in the IL movement. And so I always look at it by who is going to who's going to be the next Judy Human, who is going to be the next CEO of Able South Carolina, who's going to carry our movement when our generation is done. And so really looking at youth, looking at young adults, making sure that you're really building them up and really creating that pipeline, because we should be focused on, that leadership development. We'll go to the next slide. So leveraging affirmative action to sustain the IL movement. So, as I mentioned before, drafting those job descriptions and indicating that need to hire people with disabilities, that peer-to-peer relationship, explaining that, again, that your organization is disability led, explaining who you serve, and even the philosophy of independent living. Know how to ask the right questions during interviews. And again, you don't want to just say, hey, do you have a disability? But what we say is we say, can you tell me about your experience with disability, personal or professionally? And a lot of times people feel so comfortable that they do disclose about their disability. And that's something you definitely want to you definitely want to listen to. Now, I will say this, you do not hire people with disabilities just because they're disabled, because that is tokenism. You need to hire people with disabilities because they're qualified and can do the job with or without accommodations. And so remember that, because what we don't want is we don't want to be at tables as tokens just because we have a disability. Now, you can always build that person up if they're not qualified, maybe having them, come to some of your programs within your SIL and building them up to possibly work at the organization later on or volunteer for a little while, and look at opportunities like that. But don't ever hire somebody just because of their disability. But recruit, train, retain, and pay disabled staff an equitable wage. And I've seen a lot of centers that will keep people with reduced hours and reduced income because of the fear of losing Social Security, but the individual typically wants to make more money. And so that's a conversation you do have to have with staff, with that staff, because there's a lot of work incentives, as we all know, but there's also what's so wrong with being able to get off of Social Security if that's something that you want, because your organization should be paying your staff equitably. They should have benefits and paid time off and retirement, because we don't want to do what other organizations do, is they disvalue people with disabilities. They pay them less. We don't want to be in that. We don't want to be in that movement. Collect disability identity. And so this is something that you do need to collect, and this could be anonymous, because if you do get an audit from ACL, they will be asking you how you collect that information, and you will need to be able to show that. So collect disability identity from staff and board, or the SILC, to document the composition and compliance of hiring and promotion of people with disabilities. Now, the PPR also asks about decision makers who are people with disabilities, and that is something that is being collected. And I know that I know I'm pushing, and I think several other people are pushing the need to really collect if the CEO or executive director also has a disability. Our state actually put that in our spill this year, just to show that South Carolina is really focused on making sure that our IL network is completely 100% disability led. Next slide. So impact of not being disability led. And so Ebony and Crush can definitely jump in. Ebony, you can share your experience at that other disability organization. But what it does is it diminishes the collective strength and power of the IL movement, especially that consumer control. It takes that voice away. And I will say that I've have a lot of people come to my office, a lot of staff come to my office or will Teams me or call me just because they might need to talk to a peer that has been through something or get advice. And so I'm providing, I am running the organization as a peer, as a person with a disability as well, just with our staff. You might maintain the status quo and skewed power dynamics between disabled and non-disabled staff. I've seen that with SILs, where there are disabled staff who are very upset that the executive director is not disabled, and that's not even respected. And so really thinking about that. And if you're a non-disabled executive director on here, we're not saying for you to just step away immediately. We're saying you've got to figure out how to pass the torch. I know I always give an example is I'm a female. I do not want to run a man's organization because that's not anything that I would have that personal experience with. I would not, so that's something to really think about it. And I know for us females, we sure don't like it when men make decisions for us. And it's the same way with people with disabilities and people without. We don't like it when non-disabled people make decisions about us, because oftentimes it's ableist. The programs that we have seen that have been created about us without us just do not succeed. It creates a disability lived experience disconnect with consumers. So I don't think I would have been able to get to Ebony when we talked on the phone, or I would not be able to get to Crush if they did not feel comfortable with being able to have the conversation about their lived experience. And so being able to have that front and center, obviously I talk about my disability a whole lot, but I also talk about, how we can come up with solutions based on our experiences based on, what we're hearing from our consumers with any kind of discrimination or barriers. How can we make change in a way that would be effective and bringing that disability consumer voice in? And it strips employment opportunities from disabled individuals when our community has one of the highest unemployment rates. And we have this amazing movement. We should be creating more positions for disabled people. We should be, raising those leaders up. Crush and Ebony, do you want to speak to this as well?
Sure, this is Crush. I also think that, there's an impact that, when it's not disability led, there's kind of, there's the soft accommodations where like these things actually, we know that it could be more expensive if we did it the right way, but we're going to do it kind of our way because we know that it can benefit both parties. Whereas if it's disability led, hey, look, this is what needs to happen in this organization. This is what needs to happen in this business. This is a hard accommodation. There are no cut corners that, you can't cut any corners. So I think that that is also something that can happen. Because a lot of times, some accommodations can cost money for companies. Some accommodations can cost, take time and like intentional effort. So if you don't have someone that's directly on top of it and don't have that, like you said, that lived experience to say, hey, look, this affects today, it will affect tomorrow, and it will affect a year from now, because it's always on your mind, it's always a thought, then, things can get lost in the sauce, as they say.
I think for me, this is Ebony, when you speak about accommodations, because I was with another disability organization, and I remember being in the organization, and when I first went into the office, they kept giving me things that they thought I needed. No one spoke to me about, you need to write your, reasonable accommodation letter. And once they did, it was like, oh, that's too expensive. You need Dragon Naturally Speaking. That's too much. We're not gonna invest in that for you. We need the cheapest option. Or I really feel, because I would answer the phones, I needed a headset that would work for me. And one of the directors at the time was like, you can give her a headset, but that doesn't mean she can do the job. All I needed was a headset that worked. And I used to do information and referral at this organization. And I came to Able, South Carolina as a AmeriCorps member and did information and referral. And I was scarred for a little bit, didn't want to touch information and referral for quite some time. But with Able South Carolina, I was able to speak to, this is what I need. I had the letter written the way it needed to be, and I was able to discuss and have the active process of, this is what I need. This is, flexing time with, it was never even thought about with the other organization. Everyone thought it was too much, or it would cost. No one sat down with me to have any conversations until it was time for me to have my performance evaluation, and I just felt attacked. And then I felt like I was drowning. And what I could have done, probably could have saved myself a little bit or gotten some solutions, but they were just ready to kick me out the door. And that's what happened. But having those conversations where you, as a person with a disability, are able to speak about your accommodations and your needs, and someone asking you, like Able South Carolina did for me, what do you want? What do you need? How can I support you? That's important. That's important.
And Ebony, I will say this because I think we both have had similar experiences, but the organization that she did work for was another ACL funded program that provides legal disability rights advocacy. And so, that was a huge issue to see for us even. And unfortunately, we have had to take on a lot of the needs and the systemic needs of people with disabilities because they're not listening to people with disabilities. And so we will go to the next slide. And so disability peer, oops. I think we skipped one really quick. Just one before this. Okay, oh, I guess not. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so I wanted to show you guys a little bit. I'm sure you all are familiar with Crip Camp, but I wanted to show you a part of Crip Camp that really specifically talks about centers for independent living and kind of why they were developed. And so we will go ahead, Mary Kate, if you can start with that section. Or Jenny? Steve. All right, so we just wanted to show you just.
He's a transvestite by trade. He likes to work with handicapped children and other animals.
All right, thank you so much, Jenny. We wanted to show you that because hearing, Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann speak about the importance of SILs and again, bringing us back to the basics, bringing us back to the history and the intent of independent living. So disability peer to disability peer framework. So let's talk about this. So we are peers. And I said that a little while ago, just that being able to connect with each other with that lived experience, being able to share, some of the barriers in society. I always talk about how discrimination is painful all around, no matter what kind of discrimination you receive, especially, and with your peers to be able to really talk about the discrimination that you receive as a person with a disability is impactful, to be able to talk about solutions and developments of programs. And so really thinking about it from that lived experience. And I do want to just point out too, people with disabilities can absolutely be college educated and have certifications and have Juris Doctorates. I mean, we've got a staff, we've got Harvard grads on our team. People with disabilities can absolutely have these certifications and degrees just like anyone else. But I will tell you that lived experience is pretty significant as well. I think that is really truly what we look for in our team too, is that not only lived experience, but that understanding of the philosophy. And of course, we do see internalized ableism with staff sometimes. And I think we all have had that, but because we have grown up in society that has taught us that disability is a bad thing. And so how can we talk about that with our staff? How can we talk about that with the peers that come in? Staff are all peers with disabilities working with peers with disabilities. And so the word consumer, we've always not liked that word because a consumer, I always feel like a consumer just gobbles up everything. They're consuming everything. But we are unique, and we probably should, change that language eventually when we can reauthorize the Rehabilitation Act to more peers, because again, that is what we are. We are no better than the folks that come in our door for our programs. And so making sure that we are entering in like that. And then it underpins the needs as to why Sills and Silks leadership should be people with disabilities. Again, as a disability-led movement and as one that is consumer driven, think about this. Why do we have leadership that are not people with disabilities? And so think about that, and we'll challenge you in a little bit. Next slide. So addressing power dynamics, and this is a big talk that we have a lot within our organization because we have grown significantly in the last year, and we've had to create different leadership peers. But peers with disabilities, consumers, and local disability community are the drivers of the SIL organization. And so if you have leadership that does not have a disability, you are really kind of leaning on them to be able to listen to the consumers. I've seen a lot of programs and SILs that are not consumer driven. And I will tell you, like the guardianship programs that Paula mentioned earlier, the representative payee, if you ask those folks, they probably do not want their rights taken away, or they do not want their money handled in a particular way. So how can we support them in other ways? But thinking, providing that service, how would you want to be treated, as a person with a disability? I know that I do not want to be treated no less than somebody when I go in and get services or programs. Disability-led principle is the buy-in pride must start with the SIL and SILK leadership, including the board and the council. And that's something that we have to be, I think our board is amazing. Crush, I'm not giving you any, yeah. But we have a great board because we really look at the diversity within within Columbia and half of South Carolina. But we also look at the diversity within disabilities, within professions. And so we have lawyers with disabilities. We have, people that are in public relations who have autism. We have, the list goes on. And so making sure that you do have that buy-in from the top. And if something happens that I am no longer with Able South Carolina, our board would know to recruit another executive director or CEO with a disability. That would be their priority because of the philosophy and the buy-in from the board. And SILS and SILK leadership with disability mentors and builds disability pride within staff. And so that disability pride, again, is so important. As we all shared our stories today about being embarrassed of having a disability or not seeing enough peers or mentors out there. We should never be embarrassed by our disability. But if we're hiding it and if we're not talking about it and embracing it at work, we're going to continue to be embarrassed of it. And so, we want to make sure that pride it happens. Pride doesn't happen automatically. I'll say that I probably did not have disability pride until maybe my early 20s, just because first I wasn't really taught it in school about my rights, but also I had some experiences with college with discrimination And so, it develops over times, but, once you teach someone and skill build with someone and mentor and empower someone to learn about their rights as an individual with a disability and show them that they can advocate and they have so much power behind them, that is when they really start owning their disability and beginning to really truly make change. Next slide. So board and council governance. And so I am going to pull Crush in a little bit on this because he is on our board. So Crush, do you want to take it over, or do you want?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I actually was going to hop in, and I is sitting over here raising my hand like I'm in class. When it comes to like the board and like the power dynamic and having so many unique personalities, it goes back to with me joining, and I remember like being, man, what you want me? You think I should do what now? I don't have these degrees. I don't have all of these letters behind my name. Why me? And I just remember you talking about the power that you felt like I had in the community, and that I was not afraid to run my mouth. So having a board, you has to have a board that looks like the disability community. There's people that love to run their mouth like me. There's highly educated individuals that they're really good with the numbers. So I think that is the power of Able South Carolina's board, and it really speaks to the power of what we're trying to do as an organization for our community, because our community is so diverse. Our community spans every demographic, and I think that that is a huge power. For your Centers for Independent Living, just having a group of directors that looks like your community, which is everyone from top to bottom. So I'll read the slide. Board and council governance. The board of a CIL is required to be led by a majority of people with significant disabilities, including the board chair. The council of the CIL is required to be led by a majority of people with significant disabilities, not employed by a CR or state agency entity. Hold the executive director, CEO accountable for implementing CIL and silk mission in line with the IL, with independent living. So we definitely, Kimberly is a tough cookie, but she's always in line, always thinking about the mission, always thinking about how to further the community and the community pride. So that the board, we Kimberly, as you have met Kimberly here, she's not afraid to speak on anything. So that's what you need, though. You need somebody that is passionate. You need somebody that is determined. You need, like I said earlier, a group of directors that looks like the community, and that is truly a very powerful tool to ensure that everybody is being given the rights and equality that they need in our community.
And the accountability as well. So the accountability from the board, if I brought them, maybe new funding, because every board meeting I talk about the new funding, new grants we get in. But if I brought in something about guardianship, which I would never do, our board would say, what are you doing? Because they live this and they know the philosophy. And so, holding us accountable, but also being part of our dreams. And I will tell you, we're getting ready to launch a capital campaign that's going to be epic. But, we're telling the stories of people that used to be institutionalized in South Carolina, and our board is 100%, jumped into this. This is one of their passion projects that we're all in, because this is our community that we are promoting. We'll go to the next slide. And the board, and council, the Silks, recognizes and values being disability led. And I think that's important. Again, we really try to recruit the most powerful people that we know with disabilities to bring that lived experience on as well, and bringing board members and that are going to be vocal. I know when I originally started at the organization, our board was very weak. It was stacked, which means it was people with disabilities were put on the board that weren't going to say anything, and that was not going to challenge the executive director. And so we had to really turn that around, because that's not even what I want. I want to be challenged with the board. I want, the board is very much a partnership within my role. And so it is really important for them to not only get the philosophy, but also challenge and look at things to be able to make the best of the organization. So obviously using that disability lived experience, our board chair, Corey, is a person who had cancer. And so he is a cancer survivor and has disabilities because of that. And he, uses his part of experience, really thinks about, especially when we started doing the public health programs, really thought about how we could bring in Blue Cross Blue Shield, because that's where he works. And, so looking at different aspects of that, but that disability experience. And then sharing consumer impact profiles with SILs and SILT councils help to communicate and reinforce the importance of being disability led. And so something that we do at Able SC, first of all, the board gets big packets every meeting, but we do success stories. And so we share success stories of folks who have received, have been beneficiaries of our programs, who have been able to meet their goals and just do amazing things. And so we share that with the board, just so that they could see the impact that we make. If something happened to Able SE, we know that it would be detrimental to the disability community in South Carolina, because we are really the ones that are fighting to make systems change and making sure that individuals are being served and treated with dignity and respect. But we also share stories of not so nice things with our board, of really difficult situations, like people being forced into institutionalization, people who have been abused, children who have been abused in PRTFs. And so, we share that with the board just to help, get them to understand too the barriers that we face in South Carolina. And so some of those same barriers that are holding our consumers back are those same barriers that we can make sure that we're unlocking by either systems advocacy or legislative advocacy. Go to the next slide, please. And then recognizing disability as an asset. People with disabilities are an asset to the organization, and they're part of the movement. They are carrying on the disability pride movement, but also the independent living movement. Be proud of your disability identity and being part of the disability community. And so talk about that at tables. I really, really encourage people with invisible or non-apparent disabilities to talk about that when you're doing introductions. Share with them that you are part of this disability-led organization, and share about your disability. And I will say this, if you're not there yet, you may want to, practice that. Or is a SIL the right place for you to work as well? And so that is some conversation. SILs are, not everybody comes in with disability pride, and maybe not everybody will have it, but that is something that we should be talking about when we're at the tables with professional folks or groups and funders, legislators. We should be sharing who we are. And the part of, people with non-apparent disabilities, there's more of you. There's more people with non-apparent disabilities than people that have apparent disabilities. And so I know that, you could be a huge role model for, children in the school system, if you could talk and relate to them about maybe having an IEP when you were growing up, or the accommodations that you had in place as a person with a disability. And so you just don't know, whenever you do talk about your disability, who you will impact and who will be listening. Crush?
Yes, I definitely can attest to that statement. Every time that I use my platform and I speak about disability rights, disability pride, or having a disability and how I experience it in that moment in time, I 100% of the time have somebody reach out to me in my inbox, either saying, I didn't know that I was a part of the disability community, or B, sharing their personal story because they haven't quite gotten to the point where they have that disability pride to speak out about it publicly. So what I've always noticed is that over time, once they have that one conversation and we have that one conversation, that they tend to reach back out to me all the time whenever they're having an experience. And then eventually I'll see them post their status messages and then their friends start to comment on it. And so like disability pride is like a wildfire. You know, once it gets started, it consumes everything. Everybody's now prideful, everybody's happy, everybody's, you know, sharing community. I mean, humans, we are built for community. Finding your community and finding people that know and experience and can also like, you know, those hard days, we all need somebody to lean on in those hard days. If you have somebody that you know understand, it makes it so much easier. Whereas like me, those days that I had a panic attack or those days I needed to go to Walmart and I'm like, I can't even step in the building right now. I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'm just going to splash some soap under my arms because I'm not getting deodorant today. You know, there was nobody to really talk about that too, which is why I had so much shame. I was dealing with everything by myself in my own dark corner of my mind. And the only thing that was there to brace me was sadness and depression and shame. And that all changed with my disability pride. And it's just so powerful. It's just such a huge tool to pretty much show that, hey, look, we've got numbers. This is everybody experience. And the thing about disability pride is if you don't have it now, you can get there. But also it's one of those things that you can kind of tell people, hey, look, if you keep on living, which is the goal, we all want to be as old as possible. There's a good chance that you might end up with a disability. So I'm prideful now so that if you ever find yourself in a position where you're disabled, you don't have to go through all the barriers and you don't have to worry about the roadblocks because we've already done the work for you. And that just makes it better for everybody.
Absolutely. And, you know, I was meeting with the funder last week, and the funder, you know, we were just in conversations, just learning a lot more. He was learning more about the organization, and we were talking about, you know, my disability. And then he talked about, you know, his daughter had cancer. And like during the meeting, we were showing pictures of, you know, me when I was bald, as a kid, and him and his daughter had cancer. And so he was showing pictures of his daughter. You know, he has a connection to the organization now, and he is going to give us $1 million for our building. But, you know, that's something that's so neat to see, is that trickle effect, because disability does impact tons of people. And if you don't speak about it, you're not going to be able to really change that perception or being able to influence and empower for your organization. So you will go to the next slide, please. And then people with non-apparent disabilities, again, own it, talk about it. You know, that you're at a disability-led organization, you have the power. You know, and don't be embarrassed, because, you know, even with, you know, sitting at tables with vocational rehabilitation, if there's anybody on VR, this is not anything negative against you guys, but sometimes going to talk with VR and, you know, as a SILD, going and having conversations with VR, that can be very challenging. But, you know, for our staff that have non-apparent disabilities, they can also bring it and change their perspective about people with non-apparent disabilities. I know our VR is working to improve their services for people with intellectual disabilities. And we've got to continue to help them by bringing that disability experience so that they can see the world a little bit different around folks. But creating a space, a place for everyone in our disability community to feel connected and safe. And so really looking at cultural competencies as well. I know that Crush mentioned, you know, the stigma within the Black community. If you're promoting, you know, something that is not going to meet that community, you're doing it wrong. And so making sure that you're doing your research, you're looking at, you know, the communities in your state or in your service area, and making sure that you know how to approach, learn from your consumers and learn from the people around you. Develop an environment within your SIL or SILK where staff and peers with disabilities feel empowered to share their lived experience and build disability pride. And something that our staff does, we do staff meetings, and something that our staff does is about me presentations. And so when we have new folks on, they'll tell a little bit about their lived experience, but we very much incorporate lived experience in everything we do. For example, if we're talking about people with psychiatric disabilities, I'm going to go to my staff that have the most expertise in that area. But making your environment a very safe place for all people. And that could be, you know, changing your physical environment a little bit, changing the lighting. You know, lighting is very sensitive, but most importantly, making them feel comfortable, making them feel like they have a community and, like Crush said, a family. Next slide. Just support non-disabled staff to understand the importance of being an authentic ally and model this. And so what we do say is, you know, non-disabled staff do not represent the disability community, but they practice our principles and they preach those. And a lot of times our non-disabled staff will partner with the disabled staff to be able to bring that representation when needed. So that's really important. And that's also teaching, you know, other agencies, non-disabled run agencies, the value of coming to us to get that disability representation. Again, disability intersects with everyone. If you're not learning about the communities, again, you're not going to reach people. We have particular projects and programs that really infuse the cultures in South Carolina to make sure that we are meeting the needs. If we are talking about one community, that's not going to reach them, but also looking at your disabilities as well. So are you really cross disability? Are you serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with psychiatric disabilities, blind, people who are blind, deaf, medical conditions, so on. For a long time, SILs were known to really focus on people with physical disabilities. And so it's not going to feel probably very comfortable for someone to come in to your organization if you're only equipped to provide programs for people with physical disabilities. And so really know your people, learn from them. They are the best experts. Go to the next slide, please. And strategies just for ensuring a disability-led organization and culture through disability representation. So talk to your board or your council about creating a session plan that ensures within a specified time that the executive director and board president chair are individuals who proudly and openly identify as having a disability. And so again, talking about disability, owning that, having that disability pride representation at the very top of the organization. There are trickle effects when you do have that. Talking with, you know, again, if you're a non-disabled SIL or SILK director, talking to your board or council about, you know, really needing to pass the torch. I've had amazing conversations with non-disabled SIL directors about, you know, they come up to me and they say, you know, I've really felt out of place and I really feel like I need to do succession planning because I feel like it is time to pass the torch to a disabled leader. And so it's okay to admit that, and we'll help you. You're in a safe space with ILRU, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. But create opportunities for a pipeline of talented disability leaders as well. So we do an AmeriCorps program. I think we've hired about 4 people so far from that AmeriCorps program. We have MSW interns, and we look at specifically people with disabilities that are in school. We also have a young youth. We're very big in youth. We serve several thousands of people who are in school and our young adults. So, you know, building them up to create, you know, programming, but creating your next Judy Humans and and Ed Roberts, creating your next leaders of your organization. But a lot of people are really passionate about the work that we all do and are eager to jump in. And so if you can't find people with disabilities to fulfill your staff and your leadership, then the SIL may need to reassess. You might not be doing it right if you are not building leaders. Next slide. Here's struggling to recruit. I have heard SILs say, well, I just can't find disabled staff. How is that? I've also heard people at voting polls say there's nobody that votes who is disabled. Well, are you inviting them in? Are you creating that welcoming space? Are you creating that pipeline? You should be able to have, if you're providing programs to people with disabilities, you should be able to recruit within those programs as well. But again, raising it up where you are a disability-led organization and opening it up and making it a safe place. Ensure the majority of the management identifies as having a disability. I'm happy to say that 100% of our decision makers have disabilities, and over, I think, 92% of our staff are people with disabilities, and we're about 66 staff members. Develop employment plan to bring silks to the majority disability status with a specified time. And so that was very critical for us. When I started, we had about 5 employees, but the majority were very close to not being people with disabilities. But what I wanted to do with the organization as we grew, I wanted to also make sure that our disabilities are different, that we do have diverse people with different disabilities on staff. And so that's really important, because again, if you don't have people that look like your consumers, they're not going to feel comfortable, or if you have staff that cannot relate to the disability culture, it's going to be difficult. Next slide. I know that we are coming close to time, and perfect. So here is the call to action. So let's say, what are 1 or 2 key things you learned from the session you're planning to bring back to your SIL or silk to implement and put into action? And so you can put that into the chat. You can email that, or you can just think about that of what are 1 or 2 things that you're going to do, and 1 or 2 things that you learned from the session so far. Might not be seeing the chat. Okay, I see hiring more persons in the disability community. So Danielle, absolutely. Anyone else? So think about that. And, we've took into a peer support through Zoom. Yep, we do peer support, peer mentoring. We don't call it peer support because it's not very attractive to say that. So we do Empower Hour, and for youth, it's the youth hangout, the Equip Hangout. So really looking at how you're going to meet the needs. So if folks are unable to come to your office, transportation is a huge barrier. Are you going out to them, or are you having your programs able to be virtual? So absolutely. Community building. I like to see more cross disability in our staff. Our staff currently only have people with non-apparent disabilities. Yeah, that's really important. I want to find out how many employees in management and on the board are actually people with disabilities. Yeah, and if you need any strategies, feel free to reach out. You can do that in a light way. I'm going to go back to my ED and ask if she's helping me become the next Judy Human. Haha, Carrie Driggers, that's my staff. You're going to be the next Judy Human, absolutely. I learned inclusion is important, and that persons with disabilities is equitable. Finding people who will participate actively and not just attend meetings. Absolutely. Because you do not want people to just sit there. You want to learn from them. You want to engage them. And sometimes that's just asking questions differently. Is your content accessible? Are you asking open-ended questions? But are they comfortable with sharing? Why should they share with you? And so really thinking about that. We can be better at encouraging people with disabilities to apply, absolutely. Ensuring job postings. So you'll have great recommendations looking for the intersections of disabilities and other identities to increase diversity. Yes, 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 yes. So loving these.
There was
And
a
then-
question there for you, asking if you could define having a significant disability for executive director.
Yeah, so a significant disability within the regs. So a person with a disability is within the ADA definition, and significant disability is pretty much the ADA definition, with the exception of you would be able to receive services from a SIL. And so that's what qualifies you as someone with a significant disability. And so, so would they be consumers at your organization? So thinking about that. And yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to talk about this. This is definitely a conversation that I know is going to continue. And feel free to reach out anytime to ILRU. You can reach out to Able SC if you need some strategies to maybe talking to your executive director about finding out about disability leadership. And then real quick, just how might you recommend or make adjustments to your hiring and promotion policies and processes at your SIL? So if you want to put some of that into the chat as well, that could be something that we share as well in future presentations. Do you define significant disability as self-determined? So that is for somebody to decide. So there's not any eligibility forms or anything or tool that's out there. It is for the individual with a disability to decide if they're a person with a significant disability or not. All right. And do you, okay, yep. Who can I reach out
Hi.
to? Yes, who in management has a disability? I'm sure you can reach out to ILRU. You can reach out to me if you need to talk about, the leadership. It should all be listed in your PPR. So maybe ask your executive director if they could share the PPR, because you want to see all the work, the amazing work that the organization does. And that's where you'll get your data points. Uh-oh, Timothy. Well, I'm not going to read that. But thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to pass it back to Mary Kate.
Awesome. Thank you, Ebony, Crush, and Kimberly for joining us today. I think it left a lot on folks' minds on how what areas we need to continue these conversations. So before we transition to our next break, just wanted to advance a slide to our evaluation. As always, we want to hear your feedback. What other topics does this training or session bring to you that you want to hear more about? And the evaluation link is there's a QR code on the screen, but it's also in the chat. So with that, we are going to transition into a 15-minute break. But we are inviting people to stay and hang on. If there are questions that you still have that you want to ask, that we'll have some of our presenters at the social hour, but please come join us and continue the conversation. So if there's anything left on your mind that you need to talk about tonight before tomorrow's summit, please hang around. So at 5:15 Eastern, we'll come back on screen and have our social hour. So thank you everyone so much for joining today.